there is an existential threat to Google. Now, again, I know a lot of folks, that's a very divided or divisive comment to make in the Valley. They've faced a lot of challenges in the past before, but if they can't get Gemini going in the right direction, if the people they have in place aren't the right ones to do it, you know what I mean? Like, I get it that, their exposure to Android gives them a huge install base too. They will get their act together. But in the meantime, at least, investors are shooting first, asking questions later. All right, welcome to a very special edition of OK Computer Podcast. I'm Dan Nathan. I'm joined by Deirdre Bosa. She's the host of CNBC's Tech Check. Debo, welcome back.
Hello, happy to be here as always.
All right, very special pod because two things. About a week and a half ago or so, you did this great 15-minute kind of everything AI tech check that you can find on CNBC's YouTube channel. We're going to put it in the show notes. And it was really actually, covering everything from what's going on in the public markets and the fascination, obviously, with NVIDIA, but how that's also broadening out and a lot of stuff that's going on in the private markets. And also, we thought today would be a great episode to hit a bunch of that because after your and my conversation, I sit with Arvind Srinivas. He's the CEO and co-founder of Perplexity, with Ann Bordetsky, who is a partner at NEA, and she led their Series A round. Obviously, since then, they've done a Series B round in short order after that. But what Arvind and his team are building over there is truly disruptive. Debo, I know you've spoken to him in the past, and it's really interesting. I've used this expression a couple times over the last couple months or so. The way people are talking about Perplexity reminds me about 20 years ago or a little more, the way people were talking about Google and how they are dealing with the incumbents on the net. And what they're doing is not so specifically targeted at what ChatGPT and some of these other large language model chatbots are doing. They call themselves an answer engine. I'm just curious, what is your take in the Valley? You're out there. I know this is a company that you've known for a while, and we're all getting to know it better, it seems like, every day. Talk to me a little bit about what you think about what they're doing relative to some of the, I guess, better known, consumer AI plays right now.
Yeah. So first of all, let me say that Arvind is just great. He's such a straight shooter and he knows so much about the space and he's candid. So he will be a fantastic interview. I can't wait to hear him with Anne as well. I think that's a great combo. Perplexity is such a fascinating company because when you first look at it, you go, okay, it's like an AI wrapper. They're not developing the large language models themselves. They're just pulling from a bunch of different ones. And then you start to realize that that's kind of what matters right now, is a great UI user interface that people want to interact with, that is quick, that is smart, that has great follow-up questions. And that's why I personally use Perplexity a lot too, is because I love the sourcing of it. You know exactly where everything is coming from, so you can sort through it, especially if you're a journalist like I am. You can't take ChatGPT or any chatbot at its word. You have to know where they're pulling this information from. That's what Perplexity does well. It's also very fast, and I think the follow-up questions are great. It's not that it's revolutionary or does anything, totally different than what ChatGPT or Gemini or some of the other chatbots do. It's just, you realize that in this race where we are right now, when habits are being formed, you want to be the interface. You want to be the gateway. So to your point, feels like Google was sort of in the beginning days. It wasn't that Google was that different from AltaVista or Ask Jeeves or the Yahoo search engine. It's that they put a great interface on it and became a habit and then a verb and then a noun.
Yeah, well, I think Perplexity is going to have to work on that name if they want to become a verb. And by the way, the point that you just made, I think, is a really good one. It's a wrapper. So you can go into the settings, you can change the models that you want, and you can see, what performs, sort of best for you. And I think that's a really interesting, sort of differentiation between some of those others that obviously a lot of folks have started out. And I think you and I had both, started out testing a bunch of these, paying $20 a month for them. And I think it is worth noting that, something that actually has a sort of broader appeal to like a big mass market at first on the consumer front, but then what you mentioned for your own business, the business of journalism, you just can't Google something and rely on like a bunch of, blue search links and that sort of thing. And to go to ChatGPT and just assume that is obviously something that you could take as fact is another thing. Talk to me a little bit about how you think knowledge workers, like once you get away from that behavior, like most consumers are used to, searching for something on Google, what about knowledge workers and how they're going to kind of embed it into their work life, but not, obviously also their personal life too?
I think it's a very different proposition for knowledge workers, for coders, for example, right? That a lot of the chatbots are replacing, or they need to level up and be able to be good prompters versus good coders. So Perplexity is kind of like the everyday consumer use case, whereas I do play around with the ChatGPT store a lot. I find that to be really interesting. And even if I'm making like a presentation, for example, I will go and use the specific GPT that makes graphics or charts or something. And so my answer is I'm not sure, but I can't imagine that they're leaning on Perplexity the same way. They want a little more. And I think that's still where ChatGPT is really interesting, especially with the GPT store, which is basically like apps in the age of generative AI. Adobe could have one. And I'm trying to think of other ones. There was the All Trails could have one. And a lot of them, I don't think are very useful at this point, but just I go in and visit every once in a while to see what's out there and see if any of them, are serving a purpose for what I want to do, which is very specific, of course.
Yeah, no doubt. And again, I mean, to go back and think of the launch of the App Store, which was probably what, like, nearly 20 years ago. Well, I guess 15 years ago, shortly after the iPhone came out in 2007. And I think the knock on it then was people couldn't, you made this point on so many occasions, people couldn't really have envisioned Uber just yet, or DoorDash, or something like,
Yeah.
it needed to become some of, the behavior. And then, obviously the apps were created and the services were created and the payment systems were created. And then
Yeah.
it just became, something that we all became really dependent on, I guess.
I will say as well, my 8-year-old who's sort of just getting to know computers, right? He's just testing it out. He will spend a lot of time just on that GPT store to play around with certain things. And like he can make his own logo. He can make him look like a soccer player winning the World Cup. And it's interesting that that is his relationship right now with computers and the internet versus Googling things. And obviously we live in San Francisco and he has like an intro to AI class. That's not typical of all of America, but I do think it's interesting how he's learning to access the internet and computers.
Yeah, it's changing quickly. All right, so stick around for that conversation. That is part of our Funders and Founders series brought to you by our friends at RBC Capital. So that's going to be right after we get done here. All right, let's talk a little bit about this one's kind of tearing at the heartstrings of the Valley and AI a little bit. Elon Musk suing Sam Altman and Open AI, and they're just saying it's kind of like sour grapes a little bit here. He helped found this nonprofit organization, and their mission was this was back in 2015 to work towards AGI in a way that would benefit humanity and make it open source and the like. And he's basically claiming that they have kind of not delivered on that mission and wants them to return all the profits and the like. What do you make of this? Because it's kind of interesting to see on Twitter, some of the different voices in the Valley, and some folks are obviously supportive of Elon and others are supportive of Sam Altman. And, it just seems like this is one that's not going to be resolved in a courtroom. It's likely to be resolved on the playing field a little bit.
Well, and then you see Sam Altman tweet, like, don't hate on Elon Musk, even though they're in this sort of courtroom battle. And in so many instances, does Sam Altman kind of remind me of like an Elon Musk in the sense of they put these absurd things out there. And, what comes to mind is Sam Altman's $1 trillion fundraising effort that was first reported by the Journal. And that's very like Elon-esque, when he goes out there, he has these big, bold claims that you feel like are never are ridiculous and maybe like unachievable, but then you achieve 20% of it. And that you've still changed the world, right? You've still done something incredible. You've changed the face of auto manufacturing, or you've brought ChatGPT, generative AI to the masses. So I don't know. I feel like this is almost like we're getting pulled into their world of part of this feels like marketing and distraction as well. This is what Elon Musk does. He's also out there trying to raise money reportedly for his own generative AI startup XAI. And he's suddenly at the center of the conversation, right? Battling OpenAI because they set out to do something different. So the short answer is I don't really know what to make of it. I want to learn more. I want to see more. I think the discovery part of this could be very interesting because everything sort of still comes back to those crazy few weeks in November when Sam Altman was ousted and then brought back in 5 days later to OpenAI. And we have so little knowledge of what actually happened. So if we get some more dirt, some more details, some more tea on that, I'm all for it.
Yeah, so an interesting one. And again, I just think that it'll probably be more fun to see how these companies end up competing with one another, who partners with one another, where the capital comes from, and war of words on the Twitter. Let's bring it to the public markets for a second here. So we're recording this. It's Monday. It's shortly afternoon, and it's interesting. If you're just to look up your screens, the Nasdaq and the S&P on Friday closed at all-time highs, powered by a lot of the names that we've been following for the better part of the last 6 months or so, who've been powering a lot of the gains and related to AI, obviously. But what's interesting here is on a flat day of the Nasdaq and the S&P, I look at NVIDIA, which gapped up 4%. It's up nearly 4.5%. Other things in the semi space, okay? So Taiwan Semi, we know that it makes 90% of the high-end graphics chips on the planet here. That gapped up 5%. It's nearly at an all-time high here. Intel, which opened, unchanged or so, and it's been a huge laggard, right, to the whole space. Now it's up 5%. So, this is on a week where Avago, Broadcom, AVGO, the ticker there, is going to be reporting earnings on Thursday. That stock closed at an all-time high on Friday afternoon, up 8.5%. So there's manias going on in and around the semi space that people think is very much associated with AI. On the flip side of that, okay, we have Apple down 3.5% today. We have Google down 3.5% today. We have Tesla down 6.5%. So I want to bring this back for a second. So if you don't have AI, which I think investors are saying Apple does not, if you don't have an AI product that can compete with the winners right now, which I think investors are saying that Google does not, okay? And then if you look at Tesla, you just mentioned that we know that Elon is all over the place, but he's trying to do XAI. They have Grok on Twitter, and a lot of folks think that this could be an interesting sort of, interplay between whatever he's able to create with XAI and Twitter and all the data there. But those three names are falling out of the Mag 7. Now we have the Fab 4. Talk to me a little bit about this dynamic here, Dee, because, Apple and Google are now down 13% from their recent all-time highs made this year. Obviously, Tesla a lot more. There's a massive bifurcation going in these massively big names right now.
Right. Well, let's put Tesla aside for a moment, right? Because so many other factors versus just AI, though the stakes are large, right? Because Elon Musk has said that the thing that's going to make Tesla successful and most valuable in the long term is AI, whether that be, pure generative AI or self-driving technology. For Apple and Google, I'm so hesitant to read too much into these stock moves because for the last, 2 years, ever since OpenAI came out with ChatGPT, it's been so volatile, and what we first think has been turned on its head. And there was a good note this morning from Melius Research talking about giving up before AI launches has been unwise. And you've seen that with Google, its first iteration of Bard, that disastrous sort of presentation or demo in Paris. And then there was I/O, which I was at, and people got really bullish on it. AMD as well. There was some skepticism. And now, as you mentioned, off to the races. Adobe also. So especially with a company like Apple, to hear, that they don't have an AI strategy, to me sounds crazy. No one actually thinks that here in the Valley, I would say. They think that they're just biding their time and Apple's never first. Is it rushed? Maybe. That's another question that, we're wondering today with its first AI personal computer, the best AI personal computer, however they phrased it today. Does it need to catch up? But no doubt they have, 2 billion installed devices. They have, a chip, the M3 now, which can do a heck of a lot on the device. There's going to be something there. It's just a question of whether it's like an AI upsell cycle or they're going to come out with something really revolutionary that's going to excite people in the same way that ChatGPT did.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I mentioned this with Arvind, and you can wait and hear his response a little bit. I said, be careful. You may find yourself working in Cupertino because if you're Apple and one of the knocks, every other day, it seems like whether it's Wall Street Journal or Bloomberg or CNBC, there's a story about their lack of AI or generative AI offerings, right? So if you think about it, I know a lot of folks are like getting excited about what might be on the actual device. device. But when you think about, Google's relationship with Apple, right? So they pay what, $20+ billion a year in fees, right? In search fees back to Apple to have that exclusive search relationship on Safari. And you just mentioned 2 billion installed base. That's pretty good. Now you can obviously use other search devices on your iOS device. But if you think about companies like Perplexity, or you think about other large language models that these chatbots or whatever are going to slowly kind of chip away at Google's search dominance, if I'm Apple, I may say to myself, okay, I'm getting a lot of really high margin revenue, right, from Google. But if Google's product actually gets worse and worse, right? Because for a whole host of reasons, and people are stopping to use it, it might not be as useful to me going forward. I might want to have other choices. So for me, I make a $4 billion knockout bid for Perplexity. I jam that thing, you know what I mean? That app, you know what I mean? As one of the things, like as on the iOS device. And all of a sudden, I'll tell you, if they announce that deal tomorrow, that stock would rally $100 billion. I'm just telling you, it really would. And because all of a sudden it would make you think that they're actually doing something in the space. So I'm just curious what you think about that, because I actually think, listening to Arvind a little bit, there is an existential threat to Google. Now, again, I know a lot of folks, that's a very divided or divisive comment to make in the Valley. They've faced a lot of challenges in the past before. But if they can't get Gemini going in the right direction, if the people they have in place aren't the right ones to do it, you know what I mean? Like, I get it that, their exposure to Android gives them a huge installed base too. They will get their act together. But in the meantime, at least, investors are shooting first, asking questions later on both of these stocks.
So for Apple, on the Apple front, I think that I don't believe that Apple hasn't been working on this in the same way that, Meta came out with the Oculus, its VR headset, and Apple just took its time and came out with this really great product. We don't really know what it's going to be used for, but undeniably like a cool product that will have something to do in the future, needs a killer app. And Google doesn't typically make these big acquisitions, right? It's even actually, it's interesting because you see like Google and Amazon and Microsoft making these huge investments in generative AI darlings, and Apple's nowhere to be found. Could it just take out a Perplexity? I would be so surprised if it's not working on this, if it's not, diverting all of those car resources to Siri and creating Siri as a killer, generative AI chatbot. Could Perplexity help them? Maybe. But again, it's a wrapper, right? All Apple needs is a great interface, which it is so good at making, and to utilize these chatbots behind it. In terms of Google, we did our whole Tech Check weekly that came out on Friday on Google's culture and the people leading it. And I have so many conversations here in San Francisco about Sundar Pichai, whether he's, a wartime CEO or not. Is he just too nice? Are we at this moment where you have Satya Nadella at Microsoft just being so bombastic and saying, we're going to make them dance? And Sundar Pichai saying, we're going to be bold and responsible. And that doesn't really work out either. So I wonder, we could look back on this moment of the Gemini launch as a blip, because we've talked about this before. They've truly pioneered the technology that we're talking about day in and day out. But can they get it right in the way that like Perplexity has, right? In the interface? I don't know. Does it have the culture to do so? They put their search chief in charge of the AI demos. You have to wonder, like, why are they doing that? They have these amazing people from DeepMind, right, who, again, pioneered this technology, but they're putting their search chief, a guy named Prabhakar Raghavan, out front for all of this stuff. Are they too stuck in the past? And of course, you can totally understand why they don't want to cannibalize their cash cow, because search is just such a great business.
Yeah, but it goes back to just the, like when you use Perplexity, and even though it is an answer engine versus the search engine of Google, which we're all very familiar with the ordered links and the ads and this and that, whatever, you start to say to yourself, this is like not a behavior like I want to do for another 20 years. This is the old Google search, right? And so when you think about it in that regard, and then I think about Apple, and I think about, since the launch of the iPhone, one of the big knocks on this company has really been a lot of their software offerings. Right? Make no mistake about it. I mean, Siri's been a laughing stock, for 15 years or something like that. When I think back to the Apple Maps and, people driving off into lakes and stuff like that or whatever. So
didn't Apple Maps get good all of a sudden though? Wasn't there
it might have,
around
but
that?
it's been around for like.
But our habits, our habits are already firmly on Google Maps.
Yeah. So like, I guess my point is like, when I think about, like the things that they can introduce on their own, it would take a while for the uptake take, where, think about their platform in iOS and the App Store. I mean, it's minted, gazillions of dollars worth of like app, you know what I mean? Like Apple. So like to me, like at some point the idea, and it's maybe not too different. They paid $3 billion for Beats. I can't remember how long ago, 7, 8 years ago or whatever. And I don't know what they gained by that. I know at the time they were focused a little bit on that streaming platform. They were like the hardware too, in a way, but like it's a rounding error. They're going to pay the EU $2 billion for their unfair practices, versus, audio streamers or whatever. I'd get in the act, I'd get in the game, and they don't have enough time to wait between now and the Worldwide Developers Forum, in my opinion, in June, to get something on the tape as it relates to what their plans are in generative AI. So, again, that's my 2 cents as a stock market jockey.
It's a great point that I think is well worth highlighting. And also this idea that you bring up often is that like Apple hasn't grown, right? It's not even GARPy. It just like didn't grow last year. So it wasn't growth at a reasonable cost. And it's not even, like 10% growth, which you kind of think is like a come down for a Google or an Amazon. It was negative last year, right? And I showed this chart this morning during my Tech Check segment on CNBC, but R&D costs as a percentage of annual revenue. You take a look at Apple, it is just such a laggard in this space. What is it? I think it's like 8% of its annual revenue last year. You look at Alphabet and Amazon average more than 17% of their reported revenue, Meta nearly 30%. That's investment in the future, right? That's investment in research and development. That's all the AI, metaverse, whatever it is, right? You can pivot that as we've seen Mark Zuckerberg do, but Apple's just a laggard. Maybe they don't need to because everything is going to actually be on your device. Then they have these like amazing M series silicon, but maybe they do need to buy GPUs and infrastructure, and that's going to be hard for them to catch up to at this point.
Yeah, and the other thing is that Apple has become a cash return story. So you think about this when you talk about their EPS growth at single digits, their revenue growth expected to be low single digits this year. Their margins are pretty flat in that 45 to 46% range, which is actually a great gross margin for this company. Like if you think about it, and obviously that Google revenue in search is a big part of that. But when you think about what they're spending in R&D as a percentage of their revenue, I mean, I just went to Perplexity right here, and I put in how much cash did Apple return to their shareholders last year. I mean, they returned, it looks like 25 billion, I mean, like that's equivalent to what they did in R&D. So they have to basically keep retiring shares to
Way
kind of
more.
massage. Yeah.
No, you're right. I'm sorry. It was about equivalent. I was thinking, yes, percentage of revenue. That's right.
Yeah. So to me, I just think that it's really kind of interesting. I think that, you made the point many times, like they're not going to be the first with a foldable screen. They might end up being the best foldable screen in 5 years. You know what I mean? Like the list goes on and on. But I think that investors are going to become a bit more, particular as it relates to companies that have, the head start on some of these leading edge tech.
And that could be a great opportunity because we're still so early. Dan, did you try the Vision Pro yet?
I have not. I don't. You and many of my friends who've tried it. I don't hear people talking about them anymore. You know what I mean? Are you still using it?
You're right.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like it felt like it was a real flash in the pan, and I don't really know what my use case is, to be honest with you.
No, and that's a fair point. But I think back to my Vision Pro demo. I did not buy the device, and I don't know how much I'd be using it, but I think back to that demo thinking, okay, they didn't just sit out of this, spatial computing shift. They just sat back quietly and developed. And while we're not talking about it now, I find it hard to believe that it's not going to have some great use case. And maybe you could see that as an indication on artificial intelligence too. Google's been talking about it for 7 years, being an AI first company. It's unlikely that Apple hasn't been thinking about it in some real terms also.
Yeah. And again, just to kind of put a bow in this conversation. So, again, the NASDAQ unchanged, the S&P unchanged, and 3 of the largest stocks in the NASDAQ and the S&P are down significantly on, like investors just kind of, I think, losing patience with the stories. I just don't know, D, how long you can have money come out of those names and into the names that they think are, the beneficiaries of everything that's going on. It really does feel like at least a mini bubble is being inflated right now. I do see it broadening out. Like I mentioned, AMD is up 100%, right, over the last, 4 or 5 months or so. Intel, which I think many people have just, thought has kind of been left for dead in this whole thing. They do have a manufacturing capability, which they have moved in pretty aggressively. And I think some people are seeing that as possibly a way to play this. But on a day like today, where it was literally flat on the open and now it's up 5.5% because money is just searching for a home that is exposed to these, that feels very bubblicious to me.
I'm not going to disagree with that. but then you have an NVIDIA, right, that you look at, and we were talking about it pre-earnings, and then look at what happened. And that's always like the use case. Of course, not everyone is going to be an NVIDIA. NVIDIA might not even be an NVIDIA long term, but that's what people are excited about right now, right? And they're just searching for anywhere to place money to get a part of the AI story.
Yeah, last thing here, I just want to kind of hit this story because I thought it was interesting. All right, so Klarna, which is preparing to go public, and you're going to see lots of headlines like this. This is from Fortune magazine. You're trying to ingratiate yourself to the next investor here. It says Klarna froze hiring because of AI. Now it says its chatbot does the work of 700 full-time staff, which is a pretty remarkable sort of statement. We'll put that in the show notes. And then this from Bloomberg, JP Morgan's AI-aided cash flow model can cut manual work by 90%. I feel like, lots of companies are going to have lots of reasons to put headlines like this out there when you think about the focus on margins and the like here. So talk to me a little bit. Are you hearing more and more about that in the Valley out there?
It's all I hear about, Dan. It's all I hear about are like great chatbots, especially now it's like moved into the enterprise. This is Brett Taylor's new thing. I have yet to meet an enterprise chatbot that I like. I will just say that. Maybe I'm dumb and I don't know how to use them right. Or maybe I'm too smart and I don't have that much need for them. I'd like to think the latter, but the former is very possible as well. I don't know. I mean, if this is like the great use case for generative AI is like better enterprise chatbots, then I'm a little disappointed. I don't know. I gave you that example too, which I thought was like pretty cool. The Salesforce example, when I talked to their, head of AI, how Gucci was using chatbots, and that allowed some of the customer service representatives to level up and become more like concierges. And I thought that was kind of cool. And you were like, is it really, or is this just kind of like an evolution of talking about? You had me thinking about it. And now I have to say, you've kind of convinced me. I'm not like all that impressed. Maybe I just need to interact with one of Klarna's chatbots.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I don't know.
Think about it this way. I mean, these are likely offshored, customer service workers. And we all know how frustrating that can be, how frustrating it can be for them too, just having the nuanced differences between how our languages and the like. And so if you think about if there is a level of service that we could all become comfortable with on a chatbot basis. I don't know. I mean, I've been using the airline ones for the last few years, before this, and sometimes they're much preferable than dealing with somebody in the wait times and the like here. But again, it's like case by case specific.
The thing is, when I have a question for an airline, for example, even an airline human representative has to call their manager and sort it out through so many layers of bureaucracy that I don't have these like simple questions. Usually, I don't know if I want to say I'm like an outlier, but usually I'm flying with like a kid and they spelt the middle name wrong, or they didn't have a seat or something. And so far at least, the only best use case for me is get me to an actual agent faster.
I got you. All right. Well, listen, here's one last question for you. Have you read Kara Swisher's Burn book yet?
Ooh, just excerpts.
Okay. Well, here's the deal. I mean, we're running a little thing on OK Computer right here, D. If you go to the Apple Podcast Store and leave a review for OK Computer Pod, take a screenshot of it, follow the podcast, and then email it to contact@riskversal.com. You'll get a free book. So check it out, the Burn book. So go do that. People,
no. I'm buying. That's good for everyone else listening to this. I'm buying that.
I know, and I know you love Kara.
I gotta support Kara.
Yeah, well, you're supporting it. We're buying the book. So we were originally going to give away 100. We got there. We're going to do more. So if you guys want to leave the review, go do that. We love Kara's work, and I really enjoyed the book. And we had a great podcast with her last week. So if you want to hear that. Also, thanks to our friends at RBC Capital. Stick around for our next edition of Funders and Founders. That's with Arvind Srinivas, the co-founder and CEO of Perplexity, and Ann Bordetsky, partner at NEA, which led the Perplexity Series A.